All right, good morning. I will call this work session of the Kent County Board of Commissioners to order at 10 after 10. Thank you for being here. I am going to make what I think is a pretty minor adjustment to the agenda. We're going to move item number 3, public comment, to item number 2, and then the work session bulk will be the new item number 3. So with that, I'm going to open up public comment now. Please give us your name and address, and you have up to 3 minutes. If anybody wishes to make public comment this morning, please come forward. Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Administrator, members of the Commission. My name is Dale Robertson. I'm with the Grand Rapids Public Museum. And I appreciate, when expressed today, my appreciation for the time and the effort that has been put into this process of the request by the zoo and the museum for continuation of the millage that was approved in 2016. You'll see scenarios today, and we have been privileged, and I appreciate being able to be in the room and the honest conversations and the back and forth that we've had over the issue. The county has extended their hand. We have extended our hand back in the hopes that we can reach an accommodation. But because we've been privileged to see these scenarios, I can tell you that, like in anything in life, there are consequences to every action. Some are good and some are bad. And this is no different. And also, my experience in life, things come down to what we value and what we feel is the most important, and the balancing that must go through that. Now, I will make myself available, and we'll have information that we can share and to engage in further discussion. The county administrator has very kindly offered to go through line by line on things, and well, that's appreciated. I think some of the magnitude of the budget impacts, when you're talking up to $3.4 million of a $12.7 million budget, it's broad swaths. So I hope that we can continue in the partnership in the way that it's been proceeding to this point. It is, I say again, it's very much appreciated, and I believe in the integrity in which everyone has approached this, and I want to recognize it. And just thank you for the opportunity to be here and to continue in further dialogue to get to, I think, an end that we all are hopeful for.
Thank you, Dale. Anyone else who would like to make a comment this morning? Good morning.
Good morning, I'm Jessica Cooney Davis, and I live in the John Ball neighborhood on the west side. I'm a zoo member, a first responder, family member, and a museum member. We love all of them. Thank you for your engagement as you consider the future of the millage for the zoo and the public museum. As a west side neighbor, I believe we share a common goal. We all want both the zoo and the surrounding community to thrive for generations to come. As you deliberate what expectations will accompany any future millage, this is an important opportunity not just to fund the zoo, but to strengthen the structure around that funding. In 2016, the millage passed with the zoo, making many public promises, but without clear enforcement mechanisms from the county. As a result, several commitments to the community remain unfulfilled. And in the 10 years that the zoo has been receiving public dollars, their deferred maintenance has increased from $15 million to $40 million, an increase of $25 million. These are governance issues. How can you ensure that the future public investment is paired with accountability, transparency, and measurable progress? I ask you to consider tying the zoo's millage disbursement to clear benchmarks. First, prioritizing investment in deferred maintenance before expansion. Second, requiring the zoo to work in partnership with the county, city, and other entities to develop a multi-pronged coordinated parking strategy and advance off-site shuttle parking solutions. While their current parking is more than sufficient for daytime use, additional off-site parking would help alleviate parking demand sparked by occasional special events. Third, prohibit the zoo from allowing vehicles to drive on the green space. It is so dangerous to allow cars to be driving around our playgrounds and picnic tables, and that really needs to stop. That's a liability that you carry. Require the zoo to restore the remaining green space with the zoo's master plan and your own 2024 resolution with clear and enforceable timeline. Fourth, ensure the zoo is adhering to local codes and ordinances related to traffic, safety, lighting, and noise. This is a reasonable request we've been asking for, but we still have not yet received. These measures protect public assets, reduce risk, and builds public trust. It helps create a stronger and more credible millage proposal and strengthens the county stewardship of public resources. Finally, if the zoo were to continue to receive public funding, the public benefit offered back to county residents should really be clear and meaningful. Right now, the zoo has outlined minimal public benefit in the ballot application, especially when compared to what the museum is offering. One simple step the zoo could take is to offer free parking access to residents during daytime hours when the zoo is not open. This has not been guaranteed, and while a small gesture, it would go a long way in building community trust through an act of goodwill. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment this morning? Yes. Good morning.
Margot Sodini Johnson, and I am a resident of the West Side, Butterworth and Strait. And I'm here to talk about thank you for your leadership and for the care you're bringing to this deliberation process. The long-term stewardship of John Ball Parks green space is not just a neighborhood concern. It is a shared responsibility that impacts the zoo, it impacts the county, and the broader community. We have experienced ongoing tension around how the green space is used, maintained, and protected. And public land is being occupied without clear governance. Structures or oversight, and that has created safety concerns, degradation of the space, and a strain on community relations. Today's conversation around the millage is an important opportunity to potentially resolve those issues and get us out of your hair. We have heard there is some consideration. Thank you, Commissioner Burrell. I'm going to pronounce that right, aren't I? Wrong, aren't I? Anyway, about the possibility of transferring portions of the green space to the city or county parks departments. We agree with this idea. It deserves serious consideration because it offers an alternative for the county zoo and neighborhood. If the green space were maintained by the city or the county, that one, it reduces operational and financial strain on the zoo, while they can be adjacent and benefit from a high-quality natural setting and buffer area that increases attractiveness to the area. Two, it ensures public land is maintained to appropriate standards and preserved for long-term use as expressly intended through the city and the county resolutions. Three, for the neighborhood, this would protect designated public green space, improve safety, and preserve the character of the park. This shift would clarify roles and responsibilities, strengthen stewardship, and significantly reduce persistent friction between the zoo and the community. As you consider the millage, this is a place where structure matters. Please consider embedding a clear path and timeline for green space preservation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Last time I was here, I didn't have to use these, so. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Mattia Spencer-Repart. I live in the John Ball Park neighborhood. And I want to express my special thanks to County Administrator Vandenberg and also Josh Spencer for continuing to convene an advisory committee to invite residents to this table as we explore how we can support a positive relationship between the zoo and the neighborhood. And the conversations that we're having together, I think, really matter. They are making a difference, and being in conversation and relationship with each other, I think it really is the connective tissue that's helping us move some things forward in our community. Thank you to Commissioner Faber and Commissioner Hennessy, who isn't here, as well as Josh, for coming to the neighborhood and taking some time to see firsthand some of the issues that we're experiencing. Personally speaking, it feels like we're moving forward and making some progress, slowly but surely, not all the way there yet, but it feels like we're finding some ways to align around some solutions that can resolve some persistent issues. So my hope is that the conversation of this commission today continues to build on that momentum. My neighbors and I have always wanted the zoo to be successful. It's a valuable community asset, and we also believe that we can preserve community green space without compromising the zoo's success. So we never thought of this as an either-or situation. We've always been looking for a creative third way. And one of the ways we've done that is by talking about parking. Since 2023, we've consistently advocated for a coordinated, multi-pronged parking strategy that includes off-site parking to meet the zoo's needs. So it is genuinely encouraging to see that starting to be explored, as we think it could meet not only the zoo's operations, but releases pressure on the neighborhood and preserves the green space. So the idea of investing millions of dollars in additional on-site parking would yield very limited returns and create long-term trade-offs for the land use. And so we really hope that millage dollars are not used for additional on-site parking, as it would not be a good use of funds or a smart investment. So investing, potentially creating pathways that millage funds could be used to support off-site parking would not only support the zoo, but also other regional area attractions like the amphitheater and the soccer stadium, and is a strategic path of partnership. So as you consider this future millage opportunity, we hope that this is a conversation that continues to build positive momentum, tying some funding to clear expectations. And we're here in partnership and believe that we can arrive at some meaningful solutions that support the zoo and the museum. Sorry to leave you all out of the conversation. We like you. And we want the zoo to succeed and strengthen trust in our community as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. Emma Garcia. I am a West Side resident, neighbor of John Ball Park. In the 40 years that John Ball Park has been owned by the county, the neighborhood has lovingly labored to preserve it. Neighbors who have been deemed as low income, as a neighborhood of focus in Grand Rapids, an area without adequate access to public green space, if this park is lost. Thousands of visitors, including zoo patrons, utilize the park regularly and find this space to be a free and accessible and needed treasure in our neighborhood. At this pivotal time, we thank you for your attention to the concerns brought forward by the advisory committee and by neighbors. We thank you for thinking critically and creatively about how to embed accountability and opportunity. We thank you for viewing the park as a county asset that can be vastly improved to be attractive to county residents and zoo patrons. We thank you for hearing, listening, and putting yourselves in the shoes of your constituents in our area. We appreciate your willingness to move forward for the best of all parties involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment this morning? Good morning.
My name is Jim Haveman. I've been living in this community for 82 years, and I'd like to thank the Kent County Commissioners for the support they gave to the millage 10 years ago. It's made a huge difference in the operation of the John Ball Park Zoo and the Grand Rapids Public Museum. I've been a board member of the museum since 2016. I've served on the Finance Committee, the Board of Trustees, and currently part of the foundation. I'm one of the 3 co-chairs of the campaign to raise the money to improve the riverfront, the archives, and soon the museum. Our co-chairs are Jim Williams, Julie Westra, and myself. Our staff has been heavily involved in this, and we'd like to thank the county for the $1 million contribution that you made to this campaign. I've been pleased the way the zoo and the museum have worked together over the past 10 years. We've really made a difference in this community. I've reviewed all the scenarios that you're going to consider today. As I read, everything other than the number one scenario, which leaves it at 50-50, I think is the best scenario to go with. It's a even renewal. Any other scenario that you look at, 2, 3, and 4, the Grand Rapids Public Museum loses. I'm proud of the Public Museum. I remember going through it when I was 10 years old, and I'm sure some of you went through it as you were youngsters, and it piqued your curiosity. And 240 school districts go through the museum on a regular basis with hundreds of thousands of people. And we are a destination, and I think now is not the time to turn the back on us being the destination. I carefully listened to Chairman Green's comment at the donor conference the other night, and I appreciate it very much. And I appreciate the fact that the county currently is considering the millage for the next 10 years, and it's really going to make a difference. Just remember, in 1854, John Ball put together an institute that started the Grand Rapids Public Museum. Both of them have cherished histories, tremendous responsibilities, challenges for the future. I understand the challenges on deferred maintenance. I was a county employee from 1978 to 1985. I learned a lot from the county, all for the good, and it helped me in my career later on in government. So I thank you for your time, I thank you for your consideration, but I certainly support the first scenario going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment this morning? All right, I don't see anyone. With that, we'll move on to the new item 3, which is the Zoo Museum Millage Work Session. I'm going to invite Director of Strategic Impact. Did I get your title right, Josh?
Something like that.
All right.
Strategic Impact Director. We're
Okay.
still figuring it out.
Josh Spencer is going to walk us through, kind of give it, I'll just set the table a little bit. Those of us on the millage review committee felt on this issue it was important that we bring the information that's been provided to us and some of the scenarios that we're working through part of this process to the full Board of Commissioners prior to that group making any kind of a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. So today is an opportunity for the board to receive some of that information, ask any questions that you might have of our team, and get any information that you'd like or like to share with the rest of us. So with that, I'll quit talking so that Josh can talk, and thanks, Josh. Good morning.
Thank you. So I would like to just go back to kind of all the events kind of that led up to this work session, so you kind of clearly understand the history when we received the proposal. So we received the formal proposal, joint proposal from the museum and the zoo in July of last year. In August, we held our first kind of organizational millage committee meeting, and as we were doing that, we were developing. There was a request from our leadership to do a financial analysis of both organizations, and that was also the scope of those were being finalized at that time, and that actually kicked off in September. I'm going to dive in a little bit into the scope of those studies so we kind of understand the kind of difference between the two, and what the results were and how that informs some of the requests for scenarios. But I and the consultants who I'll cover here in a minute worked closely with the zoo and museum between September and January to finalize those analyses, and those were formally presented to the millage committee on January 20th of this year. And in that meeting, there was a request to look at scenarios for allocation that included the status quo, which is a straight renewal at 50-50. Those scenarios were developed by our administration staff and me, and we presented those to the committee on March 24th. Also, on March 24th, there was a request from the committee that we look at what expectations we placed on the zoo. If there was a change in allocation where more would be allocated to the zoo, and we've been working closely with the zoo board and staff to look at scenarios for that, and a proposal you'll be seeing today, actually, in our presentation. So as I go through this, so I'll attempt to answer some of the questions. I've received a lot of questions from commissioners from both organizations about this, and I do want to try to address as many as I can in my presentation, but as I go through, feel free to ask additional questions, and there'll, of course, be time for questions at the end as well. So one of those was the scope of the analysis. So I just want to be clear, when we set this out, there was no question on whether the allocation should be changed. So the scope of these studies were really driven by what we had at the time, which was, have both organizations been good stewards of the millage funding? So you'll see that part of both scopes. What is the impact of the millage going forward? Is it necessary for both organizations? You'll see that in both scopes. But then the John Ball Zoo had a separate, we had the millage renewal, and there was a separate question. They had requested additional funding, approximately $13 million, if you used today's dollars above and beyond the millage to support the zoo. So there was we need to better understand that gap. Why is that funding needed? Where is it needed? And what impact will it have if we don't come up with that additional funding? I want to be clear, they weren't requesting that come from the millage. It was a general request from the zoo to the county. And so their analysis included additional elements that were driven by that additional request, if that makes sense. So as we looked at the zoo, it started with so first we partnered with Plant Moran, Real Point on both studies. For John Ball Zoo, we added Canopy Strategic Partners. They're a zoo and aquarium consulting firm, world-renowned, have done a lot of work with the zoo. And they had some of the information already that we would have required for the analysis already, because they did the master plan, previous two master plans, I believe, actually. So they came in as kind of the content expert. So the study really started with a condition assessment, so we need to better understand. There was a condition assessment report that the zoo had. It was a couple years old at that point, so better understanding and updating the condition analysis. So the consultants took that into account as they did their financial analysis, and especially looking at the master plan and impact of master plan implementation. We were also curious, and as we look at additional funding, looking at, well, how is our zoo benchmarking against other zoos that are in similar markets and similar size? So their study included a benchmark with other zoos with kind of key performance indicators that are identified, and how do we compare with that? Jumping to the end, they compared very well with their peers in every category, except there's always room for improvement, but we were pleased with that outcome. And then the financial model analysis. So looking back on how the millage funds were spent, and then also looking forward on the impact of the millage as well, and projecting and forecasting operating expenses and revenues. And so as part of that, certainly was the master plan. You can't forecast revenues and expenses if you don't understand when new exhibits are opening and what staff is going to be necessary for that. And there's certainly care of animals that come along with that. And so I'll get in that here in a moment, but that was a big part of that financial analysis and finalizing what that looks like. So when we looked at the museum, there were just a different set of questions. So the request was for a straight renewal. We included the same elements that we did for the zoo, and looking back and going forward on what impact the millage has. There was a question about the endowment and how has endowment grown, and has millage dollars been funded to grow that. Jumping to the end, that certainly was not the case. The millage or the endowment has been able to grow, certainly because they didn't have to take a draw from it because of the millage, but that was part of the strategy from the beginning, and that's actually strategy proposed going forward as well. So, like I said, there are other elements are all just have they been good stewards of public dollars, and what is the impact of the millage moving forward in that analysis. So both of the organizations, we sent the reports to the board. If there's any questions about any of those reports, I'd be happy to dive into to those with you. Won't be doing that today, but I will be referencing those analyses. So I didn't want to kind of touch base on that briefly. But both organizations have been good stewards of public funds and are fiscally sound and well managed. The millage has been critical to their sustainability over the last 10 years, and for both organizations, the millage is necessary to sustain both organizations going forward for the next 10 years. Already talked about the endowment, already talked about that, and then about compared to the zoos compared to their peers. But then the master plan kind of analysis concluded that we do have a sizable gap, and this is not in the full master plan, but a modified version of that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. So that's the analysis conclusions from Plant Moran, and that's what was used to, what would been used to inform our next steps here. Don't see any questions on that. So the master plan is something that we've received a lot of questions about, has been a topic of conversation. So in our operating agreement, the master plan serves a very important role in what the zoo can and cannot do on the site as far as capital investment. You know, in our operating agreement, the master plan is really an implementation document. You know, however, you know, traditionally, master plans are visionary documents, and that's kind of how the zoo has seen that as they were developed their most recent plan. When we got into the financial analysis and near, you know, this was, you know, early December, we really, you know, we had a meeting with Plant Moran and our consultants and really looking at the full master plan. It's just you know, when we look at applying that over the next 10 years and trying to do forecasts based upon that, we really ran into a snag in that there was a $300 million funding gap after applying anticipated fundraising. And so the question is when all other sources are accounted for except for the county, can we come up with $300 million? The conclusion was no, I don't know how to do that. So we couldn't base a forecast based on that. So how do we get to a more likely scenario of what we need to do based on the facilities analysis and deferred maintenance to a scenario that was more likely to be successful, but also addresses deferred maintenance, which is what we asked for. Really three things is, does it meet the mission of the zoo? All these elements do. Does it enhance the visitor experience, and does it address how much of deferred maintenance does it address? So working with the John Ball Zoo staff, certainly they are experts in their facility. They know their facilities analysis. They know the master plan. Kind of coming up with what do we need to accomplish, and what are the elements that we have to address in order to reduce the deferred maintenance to, in this case, it'd be getting down to $5 million at the end of that 10-year period, not accounting for any kind of new stuff that would pop up in that 10 years. So this is a scenario that we came up with, and really the zoo came up with, and this is the scenario that addresses the most deferred maintenance. And so you can see it on your screen. I don't want to run through it line by line, but kind of the grand total is almost $118 million of complete total investment in the next 10 years that we would need to do to really address most of the deferred maintenance. The African exhibit is the one element that does not address deferred maintenance other than a few elements in existing exhibits. However, from talking with the zoo and Canopy Partners, it does create the circulation to be able to renovate the middle of the zoo, which is important to keep the zoo open while major renovations are occurring as well. And so that is, you know, ongoing as we speak. But really, when you look at the facilities analysis, that central plaza and the forest realm and a little bit of the front entry is really where all that deferred maintenance exists. So you're really tasked with, do you continue to invest as a zoo is to kind of extend the life of those facilities, or do you replace them with a new exhibit? The strategy has been replacing them with new exhibits, and in effect, eliminating that deferred maintenance that exists. So this is a scenario that we came up with. I'll talk about kind of how we're going to treat this moving forward. But if there's any questions about that element, I know I've received a lot of questions about this very topic, and happy to answer those now before we move forward.
Thank you, Chair Green. So I'm not sure what hat I wear because I sit on the board of John Ball Zoo and a commissioner, but can you just talk a little bit about how these projects were arrived at? Obviously, the master plan is approved by the Board of Commissioners.
Yep.
Back in '24 had a much longer list in it than what's on this sheet. And this is what's the term we're using, the skinny
I'm calling it the modified
Modified
version,
plan.
but yeah.
And it selects some of the large master plan concepts and projects and selects them for presentation here in the modified. Just talk a little bit about how we ended up with the modified versus the
Yeah.
major.
So really looking at the master plan elements, a little bit of financial analysis of the impact of those to the bottom line of the John Ball Zoo, and looking at the map of where deferred maintenance exists, and really overlaying those items. So, what are the elements that do actually replace the existing deferred maintenance, and reduce that liability that's on the organization and ultimately the county? And so those elements were identified in the master plan already, so they went through a process to develop that master plan, but really just applying that analysis of financial, mission-based, and also replacing deferred maintenance is how this list was arrived at. These are the elements that do address those things.
It is anticipated, I don't think it's been formally approved at the zoo board or this board yet. Is there a need for a formal approval on those two levels? Or is it we just simply going to go forward assuming that this is the definition?
So it's something that we want to address moving forward, and I'll talk about that when we talk about zoo expectations. So we do need a process for that, short of just updating the master plan. We do need a process where we have a list of planned investments in executing the master plan that is board approved by the John Ball Zoo. Well, these projects are all actually approved by the county already under our operating agreement because they're in the master plan. We always left it up to the zoo in their operating agreement to determine when and what investments they want to make.
Maybe it's my other hand.
Yeah, so one of those hats, you'll get that opportunity. I want to say the off-site parking is a different, which is on here. This was part of the analysis that Plant Moran and Canopy did in partnership with the zoo, and looking at what we do need more parking on the site to reach the attendance goals that are laid out in the forecasts that were made by Canopy. Without parking, we can't accommodate as many people, so we do lose a portion of attendance by not having proper parking capacity. It's about 500 spaces would get us to 2040, according to Canopy's forecasts. And then also looking at, well, where do you build that parking and what does it cost and what do you save by recapturing that attendance? It really did, there was more of a lean toward a parking garage on site when we talked to the leadership at the zoo. But the analysis concluded that just was not going to be feasible. I mean, when you're looking at, they're looking at over $100 million investment, depending on the size. You would have saved about $24 million in between now and 2040. That's just not, the math doesn't add up, right? So off-site parking was identified as the best solution financially. There's also other benefits that you've heard about today as well in public comment. So that's on that list as well, and that's something that in order to accommodate the anticipated growth that would come from the African expansion would need to be completed by the end of that exhibit, before that exhibit is officially open to fully capture. Whether we do that, we have some work to do to be able to figure that out. But that's in the current scenario, and again, I'll talk about how we address that going forward.
Commissioner DeBoer.
Thank you, Chair. We've spent a lot of time talking about some of the zoo's needs. What are some of the museum's needs that you foresee
Yeah.
in this?
So that's a good segue to my next. So this is just a summary of that slide. There's also deferred maintenance plan that was identified in the study by the John Ball Zoo staff. So bringing our total kind of 10-year capital expenses to almost 131.2 million. And that is the modified version that we talked about. So in the same format, we do have to acknowledge that the museum also has capital expenditure plans that were identified in the Plant Moran study. And they're listed here. They're also identified in the report. And so there's not just the exhibit needs, but there's also leaseholder improvements, machinery, equipment. There is a capital expense reserve that the museum does have. They've been able to, through good financial management, they've been able to put away funds for capital expenses, and especially as, exhibits take several years to design and develop. And so that, applying that, you're looking at about 26.8 million that was planned to be covered by the millage under the status quo scenario, which is what the plant rate analysis looked at. And so those are real. Any change to the allocation, the museum would have to think about where those funds come from outside of the millage, and just as the zoo would for the 131 million that we're faced with. So, yeah. And I guess I should say, these are not, there's additional, there's work at the Carc, there's the riverfront that just opened, there's a potential expansion of the museum that's being explored. So this doesn't even capture all of those elements, but this is what was planned in the analysis for millage investment. So, yeah. So just getting into some of the things we just talked about. So before we get into the scenarios is the expectations. So we've done a little work on, working with the zoo and what we've heard from feedback from commissioners on, what are those expectations? And just want to have a discussion about those. So, one of the elements that was raised is certainly, annual fundraising. So one of the strings that an organization can pull when it looks at net operating income and you're looking at, well, how much millage funding do you need or public funding do you need? It is that fundraising number. So how are we looking at that? Are we tracking it? What's the goal for annual fundraising? And those were elements that we talked about with the zoo. We would have to change how the finances are reported, just be able to call that annual fundraising number out on an annual basis, and the zoo was open to that. Submitting a development plan, so just kind of seeing like, what is our strategy to hit that goal? And something the administrator has, not that the administrator is approving it or, nothing like that, but just so we have that information. And then setting a goal. So the zoo did come back with a 3% goal. I was surprised to learn how little zoos actually do raise coming from the fundraising world. And it is a capital intense, or operation. So zoos are continually in capital campaign. And that certainly does have an impact. But I do believe the zoo will exceed that goal as they have in years past. But yeah, that's the goal that they set out for annual fundraising. So that's something that we'd be tracking, keeping an eye on, are they hitting their goal and metrics, and what is their strategy? The next element was master plan implementation. So short of the zoo coming back and updating the master plan, how do we keep a running list of what those priorities are? And they change, right? So the zoo is going through an AZA accreditation this year. The AZA standards for animal care change continually as we know more about how animals operate. And so certainly there's going to be things that come from that accreditation review that will lead to unnecessary capital investments. So we'll need to be fluid in that regard. So what we talked about is doing at least every 3 years, the museum or the zoo submits a schedule similar to what you just saw of their planned capital investments. We'll be looking at, does it align to the approved master plan, and then their financial projections and timing projections for those investments. And so that gives us a sense of what we're shooting for. There's going to be some input and discussion, I'm sure, at the county level on what those are, and certainly how those address the deferred maintenance, which is ultimately kind of the number we're trying to knock down as part of that process. So that's for submission, not approval, just to circle that back, because under an agreement, all these products that are listed are already approved, and so it really is just them communicating to us what their plan is, and us having a chance to be a part of that plan, especially as we're looking for more resources. So the third item is a fund match. So we would be looking at holding back a portion of the millage funding and holding it in trust at the county. And to access those funds, they're held for that is the zoo's money. It's for capital expenditures, and the zoo would be required to come at a 1-to-1 match and demonstrate that they have, through philanthropy and public fundraising, have met the match to access those funds. And that is a way that we can just ensure that if there is a change in allocation, that those funds are applied to the master plan implementation and the deferred maintenance number that we're trying to address. And then just in non-compliance, this would be in a form of MOU. Our corporate counsel's team has already been working on the bones of that MOU, working from the one that we've had previously. And one of those, if the zoo is not in compliance, one of the levers that we could pull is withholding all or portion of the millage funding from the zoo until they fall into compliance. Any questions about that? I know I've received some questions about this item as well, so just want to give an opportunity before we dive into the scenarios.
Mr. Stack?
Thank you. Just again, the withholding a administration decision or a board decision?
That is a good question. I don't know that we've, Brian, corporate counsel, I don't know if we've actually addressed that exact question yet.
Yeah, it hasn't been worked out yet exactly what that would look like, but certainly a consideration that we have to take into account. It would seem to me that it's probably more a board decision to withhold those funds, given that they're going to have to be appropriated through the board process.
Okay. All right, so,
Sorry.
oh, sorry.
I never got your favor.
Yeah, I think it's kind of baked in here, but I just want to make sure I say it, that, we have 5 dedicated millages in Kent County, and in the other scenarios, we've contracted with an intermediary basically to then disperse those funds into the community. And so there's sort of a built-in administrator, if you will. With the zoo and museum, these were sort of direct checks cut. And I think going forward, where do we kind of build in some sort of check-in annually, quarterly, whatever that looks like, where the county, the zoo, the museum are really in communication beyond just sort of a annual report out, but really more specific to the millage. I think that's kind of important moving forward. Not kind of, it's really important moving forward, because I think there were times in the last 10 years that maybe we could have made an adjustment had all the cards kind of been on the table in a way that maybe they weren't. So I hope it can get kind of integrated into our expectations, and maybe it already is.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else right now?
All right, so diving into the scenarios. So, sorry, I did print this up for you because I knew this text would be very small on the screen. But looking at the next 10 years, I'm starting with the museum and walking through the reasoning behind the scenarios themselves. So we do have 4. So just to orient you to the spreadsheet. So the top level is the millage rate with the Headley rollback, which is the renewal is asking it to be renewed at the Headley rate. The top line under the years is the taxable value. We are using a 4% growth rate moving forward. It has grown traditionally a little bit faster than that, so that's still a conservative estimate. But we felt being conservative would be a good step. And then the total millage is really applying the millage rate to the taxable value. There's an additional revenue that comes in through other sources. That revenue is not going to move very much as we go forward. But it needs to be accounted for, and so that's a steady number. And it will increase very, very slightly, but it's not going to be enough to really make a huge impact. And then the projected NOI from the millage. So this is using the Plant Moran report. It's the thing that we have that was completed within the last 4 months, and the best information that we have on what the museum needs to sustain its operations. But just want to call out that there is that other capital the table I showed that has the other capital investments that are not reflected in that would have to be covered through NOI from the millage and or other sources. So below, you have the proportion. So both organizations have asked that it would be hard to do it on a straight just number basis based on the report. We have to do it by proportions of the total income that comes in. So in scenario 1 is a status quo, which is the 50-50 split between the museum and the zoo. In scenario 2, we're looking at getting as close to that NOI number, so that it covers the forecast for what the museum would need to break even. But because we're not using fractions of percent, and certainly these taxable values will not be exactly as shown. There is a little bit of a room in there, but really that's kind of like a break even scenario for the museum. Scenario 3, to the best of our ability, kind of looking at what the revenue for the museum would be in 2027 and kind of maintaining that level, throughout the 10-year period. So it's kind of almost a freeze of how much the museum would receive over that time. And then scenario 4 is kind of in between those two. It provides a little bit of additional funding, NOI, that would be available to go toward those capital expenses. But it's kind of in between scenario 2 and scenario 3. So as you see that, that's the proportions for each scenario that you see in the next section, and then below that is the millage allocation when you apply those percentages to the total millage for each year. So that's just the total revenue that the museum would receive, and then below that is just a net operating income subtracting that total millage allocation from the NOI without the millage number. So that's, if these forecasts hold, what would be available for those kind of capital expenses and all the scenarios above and beyond the operational expenses. So that's how the museum's kind of scenarios are laid out. Open to any questions before we look at the zoos. And it would, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, let's do the
Okay.
zoo one on the same side, and
Yeah.
then we'll come back and look at them together. I think it's good to see the other.
So seeing that first will make more sense. This is I tried to simplify this as much as possible, I promise, to make sense of this spreadsheet. So we're looking at when looking at changing an allocation, if that's what the decision is, really that allocation is being changed to address the capital investment that's needed on the zoo. So, and as we talked about that in expectations, there'd be a portion held back by the county in trust, and we calculated, well, what would the zoo need to maintain its operations? In this case, having a little bit of additional NOI that would go toward like the deferred maintenance expenses and things like that. And so that was set at 46%. So the scenario 1 is 50-50. Every other scenario, 46% of the revenue would come into the county. We'd give it directly to the zoo to use for its operations. And then as they already have been doing, whatever NOI gets applied to their capital needs, deferred maintenance, things like that. And so that's the setup. So any other variation in the scenario outside the scenario 2, the difference between what the museum receives, what that 46% of the zoo receives, would be the proportion that's held back by the county on an annual basis for capital expenses at the zoo. Because that's why you see the variation under zoo capital millage allocation proportion. You see the variation percentages because that's just the variation of what's the difference between what the museum receives, what the zoo receives for operations, and then what's left over. And then at the bottom, you see what those totals are. So you have to do a little bit of math. I mean, looking at the NOI from with the millage above, about 7.6 million. Again, the forecasts hold for the zoo, and then the left, the amount that would be in the capital fund to kind of do some of that math. So you're looking at about 43 million for scenario 2, about 30 million for scenario 3, about 38 million, almost 39 million. Well, actually, no, over 39 million for scenario 4 to go against that 131 million kind of total that we have for capital investment, if we think about it in terms of the capital expenses at the zoo. So hopefully I tried to make something complicated a little more simple, but happy to walk through these. Any questions you have, clarifications?
Josh, could you
Yes.
please just, the last figures you gave?
Yep.
For capital, where are those?
So you'd have the total, the NOI with the millage for scenario 2 through 4, which is yep, see that? And then to the capital millage allocation section at the very bottom. So we do anticipate that not all of that funding will be used for actual operation expenses, and there will be, there are, capital needs that come up and, things break and we have to replace those. There's critical, animal care systems and life systems that exist. So it provides that flexibility without them having to come to the county with that one-to-one match to address those things when there are those kind of emergencies. If that makes sense. Yeah, so we still see that being applied to the same table of expenses. It's just giving them that more discretion with those funds because there are things that come up that they can't wait, right? When you're thinking about something that could jeopardize the life of an animal, you don't want to go through a bureaucratic process to access those funds. So there was some of that
So
discussion,
the figures you just gave were the 7.6 plus?
plus the other scenarios, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, right.
Thank you.
If we, just a reminder to use our microphones for the recording. That's okay, Commissioner. I let it go with Commissioner Steck because I thought it was just his youth and inexperience showing, but you should know better. Yeah, Commissioner Faber.
Yeah, to pick on Steck, I really do want to see your zoo hat someday. I think that will be entertaining. So, one of the challenges on the capital side is, so if we go with the scenario where we're putting these dollars aside, they sort of trickle in over time, and we've got some big things probably on the front end. Is the concept here that, potentially we are bonding and then paying ourselves back? Like, what's our, I get worried that, yeah, it's a lot of money, but 2 million stacked up against whatever isn't a lot, so.
Yeah. We haven't completely explored all of those options. I do believe that there will be a lot of working together between the county and the zoo to looking at, beyond the African expansion, which is, they're in campaign now, kind of how do we come up with the capital for those investments, especially the early critical investments that we have, if you see the schedule, knowing the limitations and knowing still hard decisions will have to be made, as the zoo's been doing for quite some time, on what the priority is and how do we prioritize the limited money that we do have. So I think we just have to explore more of what those are, and how do we bring the money forward. So I think that's just going to be part of the ongoing discussion.
Commissioner DeBoer?
Thank you, Chair. I like the ideas of holding the zoo a little bit more accountable to better financial oversight. But I think in this discussion, I do want to acknowledge that the museum has done an incredible job and has been very responsible with their financial resources. And I want it to be heard and just said that, in a sense, I believe the museum is feeling kind of a little bit discouraged for their good use of resources and almost feeling like they're being punished. Where is that in the discussion, and is there anything going forward we can do to help reinforce to the museum the good efforts that they have made, and so that they're not feeling like punished for their good stewardship?
Well, certainly, I hope that the Plant and RAM report is the first step toward that. I mean, it's a glowing kind of review of the museum's operations and fiscal management. And so, being in a position to have an endowment that's not coming from fundraising, that's not an easy, endowments aren't easy things to raise money for and build. And they've been able to do that in a way that in the future, will ensure the museum is here for a very, very, very long time. And so, that part of it is acknowledging that, certainly. But I'm not the decision maker on what scenario we go with, but if something other than status quo it comes up, I think it's just acknowledging the purpose for that, and the conditions that exist that lead to that decision, that have nothing to do with anything negative with the museum. I mean, and I've worked in the museum and so it's just everything you would expect and more from any kind of review like that came from that look, which we already expected, right? I mean, it is about what I've been hearing from commissioners is about what we kind of discovered and have to address at the zoo, and that has been decades in the making, including county ownership of that asset. So, yeah.
I think Al wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I bring a little balance to this too, in that the Plant and Rand report very clearly identified that both the museum and the zoo have done a great job of managing the public resources for which they were approved for back in 2015, beginning in 2016. And so that, I mean, the numbers show that. I think that also, just to make sure we're looking at this in a balanced way, zoos are different animals, and that pun was indeed intended. Because when you look at what over 100 years of public ownership meant for the zoo, it meant that when the city owned it, the zoo competed with the police department, the fire department, and other big city services for funding. And when the county owned it, it was the same thing, competing with the sheriff and the jail and the health department for precious general fund dollars to run the operation. Typically, as true for both institutions, donors aren't looking to line up and say, hey, where's that deferred maintenance? What can I paint? What can I fix? It's the shiny, bright new thing that they want to fund. So I just wanted to also say that even though the Plant Moran study did identify that both institutions have done a really great job of managing those resources, by the same token, the zoo did inherit a very large deferred maintenance amount. And I would attest that to ownership by two public bodies that had huge competition for the scarce resources of a general fund.
Commissioner Morales?
Thank you for the nuance, Al. That definitely, I think, changes a little bit of what I was going to ask. Because I do recognize that these are two very different kinds of institutions. But when I look at the zoo's master plan and like how ambitious that is, I just wonder if there's a way we can dial that back a little bit to fit more within realistic funding timelines.
So this was the kind of the first attempt at that, because we got from a $300 million gap to a $65 million gap. So there was that, this isn't full master plan implementation. But certainly as you look at $131 million and, depending if there's additional, millage funding that would go toward that, there would still be, that $80, $90 million that we'd have to find how we're going to cover those expenses. And in that, certainly we're not going to be able to do all of those things. And so I think there's going to be a lot of conversation starting very quickly on what are we prioritizing, and then how can we get those resources to accomplish those things. So I think as we move forward, you'll see some of that alignment. That's some of those big fancy, visionary things are great, but there's more critical things that we have to address to improve the visitor experience, and how do we prioritize very scarce resources. So I think that's part of the process that we've developed here, and certainly moving forward. Yeah.
Commissioner Steck?
Thank you, Chair Green. So one of the things that strikes me as I go through, and I've seen both reports, the zoo report and the museum report, is, well, we started this 10 years ago with sort of a 50-50 split, because it seemed to make sense going into it. But these two organizations, as was just noted, are different organizations, and they do have differences in size and scope and capital needs and operating needs. So just the mathematical assumption of 50-50 has only a practical reality to it. It doesn't have any accounting reality to it. So I don't know that necessarily we're punishing anybody by considering something other than a 50-50 split. But I did want to put this in the context of the big question here is the millage renewal, right? And the millage renewal that is being considered that would go to the public would not incorporate all of these reallocations or adjustments, would it? I mean, it would still look at a renewal of the millage?
Correct. To qualify as a renewal, if the board did decide to change the allocation, you would simply remove the word equally from the former ballot language. Obviously, it's been updated with dates and all that sort of thing. And that's according to our corporate counsel. We also had Warner check it, and the clerk's office did review it as well. And so it does qualify as a renewal either at the 50-50 or if the board changes the distribution, because distribution language would not be included in the in the renewal if it were intended to be different.
So to the extent that the decision ultimately is what do we send to the voters, what do we agree goes to the voters, the idea is removing the word equally, so everything else is the same. The conversation about what allocations we might ultimately approve or implement, how we would enforce those is a conversation that's going to happen outside of the millage.
Yes, and it's been anticipated that those types of things would be agreed to prior to it going to a board vote to be placed on the ballot. The committee did talk about different options of when that could happen, but it would seem like you wouldn't want to reopen that issue after a board vote, after maybe it even successfully passes. It just seems like that everybody would want to know up front what the next 10 years are going to look like.
Well, and that's what I'm trying to get a handle on. If it's not in the ballot proposal, that it is basically distilled down into memorandums of understanding between the county and these two agencies?
It's anticipated that it would be a board-approved agreement between the board and the zoo and the board and the museum.
As conditions of the board's approval of the ballot?
I would like to see it come alongside, not necessarily, I guess, as conditions of, but I'd like to see those two things considered by the board in parallel. And if I may, Commissioner, just to kind of expand on that, I'd like to, I don't think, Administrator Vandenberg alluded to it, but I don't think it would be fair to either of these two organizations, nor the general public, nor the Board of Commissioners, or anybody around the table to put that back here to this board as sort of a, well, the public potentially has passed this thing, and then now we're going to figure out what we do, with it. I think it would be better to be upfront about what that looks like and have that discussion here in the boardroom, and then have that information out there. And I'm also wary of turning that into a annual discussion that happens in this chamber for some of the same reasons, because it doesn't provide as much predictability to the organizations, and it adds this board can be political at times. It's a political body. So I want to try to keep that sort of uncertainty out of it. So that just a little bit of color around that.
So again, the stability of the millage is built into the language that the voters approve. The stability of the working arrangement on the allocation is going to be dependent on essentially contractual agreements, memorandums of understanding between the county and the organizations.
Correct.
And that stability is based upon the contract, which is always subject to renegotiation.
The underlying, you mean the, those contracts or the?
Yeah, the contracts between the county and
Yeah.
any entity is subject to renegotiation, subject to the board.
It's possible, but I think from everything I've heard from the millage committee members, that the idea would be that we come up with something that works for 10 years and stick to it.
Right, the circumstances change and.
Right. It could be, is correct.
You're working with a lawyer, so, I mean, yes, of course, there's probably language in any agreement that allows for mutually agreed modification, right? So-
But your intention is that this board will deal with this one time, that is approval of the millage renewal language and memorandums of understanding with our two entities.
That's my intention, yeah. Minority Vice Chair Faber.
Thank you, Chair. We did something similar in the city of Grand Rapids with the first Parks millage, where there was a resolution passed by the city commission that had the guidelines established for percentages of allocation, and that was a formal resolution that the commission made, that if it was passed by the voters, then this resolution kicks in. And it would have taken a full board vote to then change that agreement, which is a little different than an MOU, and I don't know where we're standing, but I would anticipate it needs to be as quote-unquote bulletproof as we can make it from being changed midstream. I do have a separate comment, which would be, have we thought of, if we do move into a different allocation scenario, is there can you talk about the conversations around kind of floors and ceilings? Like, can we put in provisions potentially that say, you know, if these dollars, you know, if these projections don't happen the way that we anticipate that they would, you know, we've set out percentages that are going to go towards operations and percentages that go to capital. Is there a mechanism by, maybe I'm getting too technical, but is there a mechanism by which that we could say, you know what, operations are taking a priority this year because we look like we're dipping below a certain number or a certain percentage? Can you just, have we thought about that?
Yeah.
What's our?
Under the current arrangement, no, for the zoo. So the funds in the capital fund would be restricted, and the funds that the zoo would have to plan for its operations are within that 46%. Now, there's a cushion worked into that percentage to accommodate, you know, maybe for future variations. But it does, so it does ensure that those funds are held for a certain purpose, and outside of that, right, with the millage, even at 50%, there'll be variations that have to be considered, right, for different things. So I think that's the current thought. Not that it couldn't be, right, certainly we could think about a different arrangement, but that's currently how it's structured.
Commissioner DeBoer.
Thank you, Chair. Do we foresee any risk of voter confusion allocating it this way with changing the millage language a little bit, but then doing the memorandum of understanding or contracts?
That's not my
I don't know if that's your
expertise.
place to answer. I mean, I can answer that. I think it's a fair point. There could be, we would be transparent in this group about what we were trying to do. I don't know that it's going to be confusing for a resident to parse through it, but I think that's a question we have to keep in mind. Certainly not what I would like to have the outcome be. We'd like it to be transparent and have folks have an understanding of what they're considering at the ballot. Vice Chair Teal.
Thank you, Chair Green. I sit on the millage subcommittee, and I think I've learned more about zoo and museum than I ever thought I would in my life. But one thing I did do is I asked staff to go back and pull the millage subcommittee original documents. And I just wanted to point out one item that I found quite interesting. It's back when it was originally passed, they thought that this would generate 8.9 million and that each organization would get 4.35 million. So even in the worst case scenario for the museum, they're still getting, we've seen huge increases in this millage, and they're still getting way more than anybody thought. So I think we're just trying to find that balance of keeping both of these organizations as whole as we can, but also, you know, making sure we are putting our focus on the county-owned asset, which is the zoo, and making a little bit of a, taking a good hit at that deferred maintenance that we have in the master plan. So just a couple of comments that I wanted to put out there for consideration.
Thank you. Others? I would just agree with the general, as others think about if they would like to weigh in. I would agree with Commissioner Vice Chair Teal's assessment. I think that's something that we've lost a thread on a little bit, is that the size of this pot has grown really about 2x over the course of the decade. And while we do have changes in potentially in the way we're looking at allocating it, I think everybody's going to be doing better off than they were prior. I'd really like for us to get to a point, I wish we were at a point where neither of these organizations needed the public funding. I'm sure neither of them would prefer that they require public funding. I'd like to get us on a path to move away from that, but that's looking at the financials and doing the deep dive. That would be really irresponsible, I think, at this stage for the board to not give the voters at least the opportunity to consider that. So that's kind of big picture, my thoughts on that. Yeah, but there's the floor's still open for other questions, comments. Commissioner Steck.
So there was a conversation or a comment early on, Josh, about the $13 million operating shortfall. it's not contemplated that the county will also be filling in a $13 million shortfall in operations at the zoo after this.
That's not the plan.
Right, well, good. The other question, May 5, the recommendation comes from the committee. Will it include copies of these proposed MOIs,
We'd like to,
or MOUs, excuse me?
we're going to go back and take a look at this. This is the tentative timeline right now. I'd like to see where things are and, have a discussion with a few folks from the group. But I'd like to have whatever, by the time this comes to the Board of Commissioners for consideration of the full board, I'd certainly like to have that alongside of it. So.
Because that's really the nut of the dispute here, or the conversation, seems to me, is what's in those proposed memorandums as opposed to what's on the language of the ballot.
Yep.
Okay.
Commissioner Morales.
Just a question for clarity. For the, can you put the timeline?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. So for May 5, the millage advisory committee is going to choose one of the scenarios, or are we going to choose a scenario on the 14th?
No, we would make the millage advisory committee, and I have to regroup based on the conversation, just see where we are in this timeline, to see if that makes sense or not. But by the time we make whatever comes to the Board of Commissioners will be a recommendation from that committee. So it won't be including it. Technically, according to the board rules, the job of the committee is to make a recommendation to the chair, which is kind of goofy in this instance because I'm the chair of the committee and the chair of the board, but we'll make a recommendation, and then as the chair, my intention would be to send that recommendation to the Board of Commissioners for consideration.
But that would be for one scenario.
Yes. No, we're not going to, that's sort of the intent of having the smaller group, is to spend more time with this and deep dive so that we don't have to do that with the full board. But that's also why we wanted to have a work session today, recognizing that this is of great interest to the full board so that everybody has a chance to get all the information and ask questions and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Others? We have a question slide, the requisite question slide. I love it. You never know how to finish these things. You gotta, yeah, that's good. Yeah, are there any questions or comments from commissioners for anyone? I think we've given time to do that, but there's time available. I'm not trying to cut anybody off, so. Yeah, Vice Chair Faber.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're right now, we're really focused on kind of getting the millage and the language across the line. We know there are a number of other potential opportunities for the county to invest or think differently about our investment in John Ball Zoo and the green space, park space. And it's hard not to kind of intermingle those two things, but I would like to continue the conversation. And I know we have our neighborhood group doing that, but I think trying to get a real clear line of sight in terms of what is happening with that space, specifically the parking, and how we're going to handle. And it may not be appropriate for that to be in these board resolutions, MOUs, et cetera, but I think this is our opportunity to nail those things down as well. I think we owe that to the community, that they really know what the timeline looks like to the best of our ability to resolve some of those lingering accountability issues. And so I just want to acknowledge and thank the neighbors for coming out and continuing to advocate for really clarity and accountability on those issues.
Thank you. Others? Commissioner Stack?
There's no limit on a work session, is there?
No, well, not today. We've blown past that.
So this dynamic between predictability and rigidity in these memorandums to help both organizations understand what they're looking at, I get that. At the same time, there is some value in some capacity to be modifiable or fluid in those just because life changes and circumstances change. So I'd encourage you to kind of look at that good balance between building in some fluidity into the agreements that still preserves the ability to respond effectively to those changes.
Thank you. I think that's a good suggestion. Others? I don't see any. I'm going to call it, so this is the last just chance for right now. Of course, this will go back to, at some point in the near future, the committee, as the timeline said, and then the full board. So if you have follow-up questions, I know, I'll just state, just for the, I guess for the record, there were several commissioners that were attending a county conference today. I think 5 of our group that were there. So they have an opportunity to, we've given them an opportunity if they wish to individually to meet with Josh and get the same information, and/or maybe they're hearing this on the recording of the meeting as I'm speaking now at another point, but just an FYI on that. All right. Item number 4 on the agenda is commissioner comments. Any commissioner comments? I hope not. All right, I don't see any. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.